Everyone. So Darvin Ham, in my opinion, had a great season given all the circumstances. I know many people feel otherwise. I know a lot of people in Lakers Nation think he's the worst coach ever and he should have never been hired and this, that, and the other. But when you look at all the circumstances and the fact that this guy, who is to many people a terrible coach, led that team to the Western Conference Finals when the team didn't even play 10 full games together as a unit going into the playoffs. The adjustments he made, all of the counters, out coaching Steve Kerr, like he did a great job. He was given a atrocious team to start for the first half of his NBA coaching career as a head coach. And he still managed to have them have a top defense. They were like a top 7 offense. They weren't a good three-point shooting team, but still, they were bad. They were really bad, really undersized, all guards. And Darvin Ham still managed to keep them afloat until they were able to get a trade done. Once they got the trade done, the Lakers were off to the races and were able to make the NBA playoffs. Darvin Ham basically took 2 separate Laker teams and ended up leading it to the Western Conference Finals. There's not many coaches that could do that. He made in-game adjustments. Was he perfect? Absolutely not. Did he make a lot of errors at times and questionable decisions and rotations and stuff? Absolutely. But one, it's not like he had a roster that he was super familiar with, knew who to trust, knew how to go about it, what players worked well with each other and all that stuff, because he never had the opportunity or time to figure that out. Regardless, Darvin Ham is on a 4-year contract. The Lakers are not going to fire him and hire somebody else and still have to pay him on top of having to pay the new coach. So get comfortable with Darvin Ham. And with that being said, Darvin Ham, again, I think has a lot of great qualities from a coach. Defensively, he is an excellent coach. I mean, he coached this Lakers team, again, with no chemistry, no like real understanding of like team building because they hadn't had time together, and they still were the best defensive team in the league. That in and of itself, the ability to get players to buy in. I mean, this guy even had Russell Westbrook buying in, coming off the bench and playing defense, which no other team was able to do. And yet Darvin Ham was able to do that. So he does have his real qualities. He definitely improved, especially as the playoffs went on, with calling timeouts, certain decision making, his rotations, stuff like that, making these minor little adjustments. He made adjustments that ended up winning us the Grizzlies series. He made adjustments that ended up winning us the Warriors series. And I imagine that as he continues to grow, as he gets an established team, he will continue to be better and coach better and have more success. I mean, every coach has to start somewhere, right? Even greats like Phil Jackson or Greg Popovich and stuff like that. Like Greg Popovich, his first year, he wasn't even a playoff team. And there were questions about that. Phil Jackson, Lakers Nation wanted to fire Phil Jackson at times and were, with their pitchforks ready to go, saying that, Phil Jackson doesn't know what he's doing, even though he won, 11 NBA championships as a head coach. Even with that resume, people still question him and his decision-making at times. It just goes in with what the coaching is. The coach is usually the scapegoat. The coach is usually the guy that ends up being the organization's kind of, we'll just cut him and everything's better, usually when that's not the case. And not everything goes into coaching. You have the best coach in the world. You could have the best game plan, the best structures, the best everything. And still, at the end of the day, it's up to the players to show up, play, and execute. Jason Kidd has probably the best quote for this regard, where Jason Kidd was asked, about the Dallas Mavericks when they were having their struggles, and he said, look, I'm not the savior. The coach is not the savior. The coach's job is to have guys understand what their job is and where they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to execute. But it's up to the players to do that, right? The coaching only goes so far. The extension only goes so far. But with all of that being said, Darvin Ham could use some veteran leadership on the bench. Just a guy that has an understanding, that's been there, done that, has been a head coach for years, kind of help him guide and maybe help him see things that he didn't see otherwise. Originally, when Darvin Ham was hired, that was the idea, to get a head coach. And one of the guys that I want to bring up is Doc Rivers. Now, look, I have said this on numerous occasions, and I don't believe Doc Rivers is the head coach that people try to make him out to be and the media tries to make him out to be. Doc Rivers has done nothing in his coaching career for the most part. Yes, he won an NBA championship with the Boston Celtics, but that Boston Celtics team I could have coached, and we probably still would have won an NBA championship. That team was so ridiculously stacked, had basically player coaches and guys like Rajon Rondo, Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen. Like, they had just so much talent, so much depth. They just needed somebody there on the sideline calling timeouts and stuff. That's basically what it ended up being. Outside of that, he's pretty much underachieved and been a coach that can get you to the second round, and that's about it. It's about as far as you're going to go. I think his decision-making at times is very questionable. I think some of the things that he and his approaches are very questionable, but he's always been known as a player coach. He's a guy that has had plenty of experience as a head coach. He's a guy that has an understanding and grasp on how to approach things and how to go about things. His teams have always been very good offensively, and he's also had some pretty good defensive teams. I just think it would give another look to the Lakers, potentially adding him to the coaching staff. I don't think he's great as a head coach. I think if you want to be a good team, cool, Doc Rivers is good as your head coach. I think if you want to be a great team and an NBA championship level team, then I don't think Doc Rivers is your head coach. But as an assistant coach, I think he could be one of the better assistants in the league. He is known as a player coach. He's pretty good in some cases on just understanding the flows and eps of games. He is a coach that likes to have his players figure it out. At times, he's questionable about the X's and O's. But I do think Doc Rivers, with his experience and his sort of, view on just the game of basketball and stuff, could give a different look from Darvin Ham. Darvin Ham and Doc Rivers are very similar in a lot of ways, but I think Darvin Ham is better at like the X's and O's and just the defensive side of things. And I think Doc Rivers could really help with maybe some of the offensive sides and just, again, giving another perspective of a guy that's been there and has won an NBA championship. I don't think Doc Rivers is just like the be-all, end-all, but I do think he makes a lot of sense as one of the lead assistants, as one of your lead assistants, because one, he doesn't seem to have any head coaching candidates or potential suitors, right? And the ones that he did have or even just had interviews with, he either backed out of or they just didn't go with him. And the coaching well is drying up, and it's drying up fast. So does he end up just saying, all right, you know what, I'll just take a year off or two or something like that and just see what opens up, and then maybe I can be a head coach? Or does he look at it as like, okay, my reputation right now, right, because he's just underachieved on several places and has kind of gone from team to team to team. Does he look at it as like, okay, well, if I go to a team like the Lakers, I will be under the spotlight. Usually the coaches that have success with the Lakers end up going elsewhere. Jason Kidd went to Dallas, right? Frank Vogel just got rehired with the Phoenix Suns. So he might look at it as like, well, if I go to the Lakers, be the lead assistant, if we win a championship, then that should boost my stock again, and I can go find a head coaching job. It's definitely a possibility. Now, one thing is, if the Lakers end up landing Chris Paul, they didn't have the best relationship towards the end when they were on the Clippers together. Now, based on the reports that came out during that time, it was primarily because of Doc Rivers signing his son Austin. That's where it all stemmed from. That Chris Paul didn't like that, for one, and he didn't like the way that he felt Austin got special treatment and stuff because his daddy was the coach. And that may or may not have been a possibility. But according to Chris Paul and Doc Rivers even recently, like, a couple months ago, if I'm not mistaken, or might have been a year ago by now, but it wasn't that long ago, even in an interview talked about him and Chris Paul's relationship and said, hey, we're great, we're good, we're friends, basically all is well, right? So obviously if there's still that, negative, muddy water, let's say, for Doc Rivers and Chris Paul, then Doc Rivers is probably off the table. But if Chris Paul is like, no, I would love to have Doc Rivers back or something like that, then I could see Doc Rivers being an option. Because, again, all the reports, all intents and purposes, look like Chris Paul, whenever the Suns and him figure out what they're going to do, he's very likely heading to the Lakers. Now, whether that happens or not, we will see. But it does make sense for the Lakers. It makes sense for Chris Paul. And, maybe adding a guy like Doc Rivers, who understands Chris Paul, had success with Chris Paul. They didn't win a championship, but they still had some success. They had a good understanding and relationship up until the Austin Rivers thing. Maybe that's something that can trickle over to the Lakers and kind of provide some stability. Because again, I would like to see the Lakers bring in a experienced head coach. The problem is you're not going to get some elite, experienced ex-head coach to come in and be your lead assistant. You're just not. You're going to bring in somebody that has experience, but is kind of in an influx, like a Doc Rivers, right? Or you're getting an old coach who hasn't coached in the league in a long time, like a Jeff Van Gundy or Stan Van Gundy, something like that, who, it's like, okay, well, does he understand the times? Especially like a Stan Van Gundy. Last time he coached, it ended terribly. So, to bring in a guy like an Austin or Doc Rivers, I don't think it's the worst thing. I actually kind of like the idea. Again, and this is coming from somebody that's not a fan of him as a head coach. I don't think he's a great head coach. I don't think he's I don't think he's like terrible. I just think the hype doesn't match the resume, Like, people act like this guy is an all-time great coach. Like, he was voted on what I think it was ESPN or whatever's like top coaching candidates. He was like top 7 or something like that. And as like one of the greatest coaches ever. And I'm just like, how? Like, there's coaches that have had more success in less time that aren't even considered great to good coaches. And he was over them on lists. Like, I just think the hype for Doc Rivers doesn't match what he's done, right? But I do think that he does have value, and I do think that he can bring a lot to the right team. And if you can bring him in as an assistant, then you can get all of those positives. You can get all of those, just all the good things that he brings to an organization without having to worry about the bad, because you have a head coach that they're going to make the final decision. They're going to make the call. It's their team. Would Doc Rivers be willing to kind of take that back seat? That's the real question. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion, so I pass the question on to you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? Again, just kind of exploratory. I just was kind of thinking about it because Doc Rivers still doesn't have a job, and all the coaching, all the places of coaching, like even Toronto just hired their new head coach. And it's like, well, Doc Rivers is probably either out of the league or he's going to have to take an assistant job. And I wouldn't mind him on the Lakers. But anyway, again, however you feel.